Okay. Next slide. Yes, thank you. All right, now this is my opinion based upon my research.
GRC misdirection.
Yes. I think it's worth reiterating for those who may have missed the implication earlier on that the DRC claims to be based in the Carlsbad, New Mexico area are utter nonsense. Although an enormous and tempting cavern is indeed located in that vicinity, the only evidence that it is the Dunny Cavern is that it is a stalagmite-stalactite cavern near a water source. It fails to match up with any of the other evidence we have about the cleft and cavern location. I'm assuming that this is a deliberate misdirection on their part to ensure that their research was unimpeded by the meddlesome or idle curious, as well as to ensure that they could continue working quietly without government interference. Last one. My conclusions. This is first half now. We're not going to end here. So why did the tree of possibilities link the Dunny here? My own theory is that the Rio Grande Rift, coupled with New Mexico's volcanics, were an extraordinarily good match for Rinnereth's description. Yet even though this combination is unique for Terra, it surely is not rare within the Great Tree. Because of this, I strongly suspect that Rinnereth included more than a description of the cavern in his book. Specifically, I think he included a description of a surface species very similar to the Dunny themselves, us. It is extremely unlikely that our genetic compatibility with the Dunny is a random coincidence. It is far more likely that Rinnereth intended from the very beginning for the Dunny eventually to commingle with the surface dwellers and for us to become something more together. And to accomplish this, he needed to describe an indigenous species like us. The Socorro Magma Body. Portal to the Dunny Cavern. For this part, we are proceeding into an overview of my New Mexico investigations of the cleft caldera location. I will be speaking primarily from an in-cavern perspective, though must start with a brief out-of-cavern introduction. I began this project with a fairly simple premise, that the worlds and story of the Dunny were crafted by two master storytellers named Rand and Robin Miller, and as a consequence, they ensured the storyline held together and made sense. We know Rand in particular spent a good many years working on this. Rawa has stated that when he started at Cyan Worlds back in 1992, Rand already had a cohesive and detailed Dunny history and storyline laid out, and that Rawa peppered him with countless questions about the Dunny, their history and ages, and their cavern here. I strongly suspect that this exercise is what earned Rawa his role as official Dunny historian and canon guard. Rand has talked about and demonstrated his interest in blending the Dunny story with our real-life world. Not only is this the premise of Uru, but it was further underscored when he had Jeff Zandy attempt to start the pre-after alternate reality game at the 2001 Mysterium. This ARG was intended to be a lead-in to the Uru launch 2 years later, though wound up getting a late start and seems to have been only partially completed by Uru's launch date. According to Rand, there's still a missing pre-after spiral in the wilds of New Mexico. One of my projects. Thus, I have been examining all the evidence we have at hand with a focus on gleaning any details that provide clues about the cleft location. The tricky bit is in knowing where to draw the line between artistic license and evidence. Rob has stated that the 5 missed games are recreations of historical events, and so we're limited by available game computer technology and the need to tell a comprehensible story. This is further complicated by the 3 books, which are brimming with inaccuracies known as Wingrovisms. This resulted primarily because David Wingrove was given only limited information and was expected to fill in the blanks on his own. However, Uru is different and is intended to be canon in itself, which means that the only evidence we can rely upon at face value is what we see for ourselves in-game. The slides that follow are my best attempt at sifting through all this information, using it to narrow down the potential locations for the cleft in New Mexico, and then conducting research road trips to those locales. Strap in. Okay. First part is about the Dunny and earthquakes. As we can see for ourselves, there's plenty of major damage in the cavern today. End of Ages, while being a recreation of Dr. Watson's quest, also provides ample evidence of damage, pinpointing it quite probably caused by earthquakes. Dr. Watson documented mild tremors throughout his explorations of the Great Shaft and Kavir.
Should I move to the next set of pictures?
People are probably not going to be able to see this very well. I have black and white versions as well as color overlays of the different damaged areas that I'm going to be talking about. This first part is about damage in the Great Shaft. The damage we see in the Great Shaft was documented in the Book of Tiana as caused in 1682 by a series of massive earthquakes which resulted in severe structural damage just when the surveyors were finishing their official passage up to the surface. The five lords had the surveyors repair things as well as they could and then seal the shaft at the surface end. What we see for ourselves in the End of Ages Great Shaft is significantly different from what we see in Uru. Notably, the damage documented in this slide is absent in Uru, along with the interior superstructure with its fire marble lamps, implying that in Uru we are somehow seeing an instance of the Great Shaft during its construction instead of in present day. In examining the End of Ages damage not repaired by the surveyors, it appears that a huge chunk of the ceiling broke away at the shaft top and fell downward at a slight angle, destroying the spiral stone pathway in several places. My theory is that rather than repair the pathway, the surveyors simply altered their elevator installation work in progress. They had begun with plans for a single elevator spanning the entire 3-mile shaft length. In Dni Tiwa, we can see the rails already installed to the left of the Taman doorway. The surveyors instead installed a new elevator landing floor as a means to repair the topmost damaged path and used it as the new endpoint for the major length of the elevator path, installing a new set of rails there. They then shortened the existing elevator rails and continued using that set for the final short stretch to the shaft bottom. My theory. But you can see the damage. It's just my theory about why they did what they did. Okay, there's dramatic damage throughout the portions of the cavern to which we have access. The Book of Tiana documents this happening on the day of the fall in 1744. The first two earthquakes presumably were the result of bombs used by Agaris and Veovis to open a great crack in the cavern wall through which they pumped their poison gas. The third was by far the most powerful and damaging, and I believe was the result of their tampering with the nearby magma chamber. As we'll see later in this presentation, triggering activity there would have potentially devastating consequences in the cavern and beyond. Okay, and I don't know if you can see it or not. It's basically showing damaging the Kalo Pub ferry terminal and then looking downward from the library. It's up to you. I'm not going to slow down. Okay, here's, according to the Book of Atris, when Atris was imprisoned in the Kavir chamber in 1773, he attempted to escape using a small handheld dunny rock cutter he found in a corner there. This had disastrous results, causing the small crack he was exploiting to become massive, running across the ceiling, compromising another doorway opposite, and permanently jamming those doors. The ceiling collapsed partially, felling two large columns at the doorway Atris was attempting to open. We see this rock fall and damage in several subsequent states. Yesha's Path of the Shell Journeys brings us to two different versions of this Kavir room. The first version, shown in the upper left, we see only briefly before Yesha links us to the cavern and shows us Karoth's arch aglow. Afterwards, she links us back to Kavir to a later version shown in the middle. The version we see in End of Ages is the lower right, where the rubble is cleared away completely and the doorway is opened. This activity is documented in the Book of Duni, happening a few years before Yesha is born. This is the first time since Atris's earlier disaster that other parts of Kavir become accessible from the chamber. The Book of Duni makes it clear that Kavir as a whole was easily accessible to Atris and his companions, which means that the rockfall we see today, which blocks off the staircase at both ends, must have happened at a later date, most probably the result of another major earthquake. The likeliest ones we have on record from more modern times is a series in 1906. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, we're moving on to life in Socorro, which is where the magma body is. Earthquakes weren't recorded by surface dwellers in New Mexico until the middle 1800s. The first such recording was an entry in a soldier's journal dated 1855. The ones afterward were documented officially using an outdated magnitude measuring system. The data on the following pages has converted these old magnitudes to the system we use today. Socorro began as a Puro pueblo named Tepana. When its residents kindly provided food and water to a group of starving Spanish settlers traveling northward out of the Jornada del Muerto, the Spanish referred to the pueblo as Socorro, meaning succor or help. By the middle 1800s, New Mexico was witness to armed conflict aplenty. Mexican-American War from 1846 to 1848 was the tail end of the long process of New Spain territories successfully declaring themselves sovereign states. California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas all were claimed by Mexico, whereas American troops declared them to be American territory. Shortly after this was settled, the American Civil War reached New Mexico in the 1860s, punctuated then and later by the Apache Wars. The Socorro area during those times saw troop movements and 2 forts built and occupied, and prospectors mining for silver, gold, and copper. The series of Socorro earthquakes in late 1906 made sensational national headlines. Press accounts were greatly exaggerated by journalists who assumed that surely the earthquake's effects were on a par with the devastation wreaked in San Francisco only a few months earlier. In actuality, the Socorro earthquakes caused only moderate structural damage and nobody was killed, though a few families chose to sleep outside in their yards until things settled down again. Now we're getting into data.
Ooh.
The major earthquakes of magnitude 4.5 and higher for New Mexico are displayed on the upper right map. And again, it's going to be really hard to see much. The plotted data is shown in the blue inset part in the lower area. Those are the data points. The earthquakes are color-coded and size-coded, with big pins showing magnitude of 5.0 and higher. Pink pins show the years 1851 to 1900, blue pins show 1901 to 1950, and cyan pins show 1951 to 2000.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Looks a lot better on the camera, too.
The left map shows a close-up of the Socorro-Albuquerque Basin area. In contrast to the rest of the map, there is an obvious long-term clustering of significant earthquakes in this zone. Here's a scatter plot of those same earthquakes mapped on the last slide. The diamonds show all the earthquakes which occurred within the Albuquerque Basin. The New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology was established in Socorro back in 1889 to foster mining education in the region. They began monitoring region-wide earthquake activity in the 1960s, at which point hard data about microquakes became available. As a result of this extensive data, in 1965, Alan R. Sanford first published the theory that an extensive magma body exists within a few miles of the surface in the Socorro area. And this is a map from one of his papers. So far as I've been able to learn, there are no existing photographs of the Socorro magma body itself. The images above show a lava tube in Hawaii in the upper right, a dormant magma chamber in Iceland in the lower right, and a CGI artist's conception of an active magma chamber developed for Discovery Channel's Curiosity program. These images should give us a rough idea of what the Dunny magma chamber most probably looks like. Dunny records. The known Dunny records of the magma chamber are from Atrus the Younger's journal drawing included in the Book of Atrus, and Atrus the Elder's map showing its depth in relation to the other cavern features. I'm theorizing that not only were the Dunny exploiting the magma for its energy, but that they had its management down to a refined science. I would guess the chamber was monitored by specialists constantly, and that Agaris and Villalobos must have assassinated those on duty the day of the fall so they could freely meddle with magma. Atrus's old map obviously was not drawn to scale except for the cross-section portions where he provided a vertical scale. So although the map isn't helpful for determining the size and distances on the surface, it provides a relational layout of the various features as well as relative depths between the various features. If we believe Escher was accurate, then we know that the shaft bottom is 3 miles beneath the surface, which then enables us to scale the depths of the other features. This translates to the magma chamber being just over 6 miles beneath the surface and the cavern being a bit deeper. Oh, can you go back a bit? Okay, and the 2 arrows I drew in there, they are based on a quote from the Book of Tiana, which again, it could be a Wingrovism. So the quote is, "It had long been a standing joke that the Dunny would never excavate to the east of the main cavern lest they had to redesign the guild house, but the truth was that the rock to the east was home to a stable reservoir of magma slowly cooling over the millennia from which they had long tapped energy."